Morning, church. Having coffee here with you this morning. We're recording. I'm sitting in the kitchen, a little breakfast nook at our house, and I'd like to share a story with you this morning, a word of encouragement. We were talking about this in our life group last night, and so I'd just like to encourage you this morning. But first, I'm going to back up, and back about 30 years ago, Willette and I were looking for a home. And at the time, our pastor, Rob Daly, said, well, why don't you make a list and pray about it? And I won't get into that whole story. Some of you have heard it before. But we did that. We made a list, and we wrote down all the things we wanted to see in a home or have in a home. And we prayed about it, and we put that list out. And we came upon this place, and everything that we had asked for was in the house with detail, except for one thing. We had asked for a view. We'd asked God that we could have a view. We wanted to look out upon His creation and just admire it and know that He was God. And so we prayed about that, and very clearly God said to us that the view that He wanted us to have was the view that we see just outside our window. He wanted us to look upon College or Belvedere Street. And from our house, He wanted us to see the street where the people of Lennoxville, Sherbrooke, go up and down the street. That's what He wanted us to see, because that to Him was the most important thing, the most beautiful thing. It was the people in this town. And that was confirmed in our hearts. And so we've lived here at this house for the last 30 or so years. And why do I tell you that story? Well, this past week, last Friday, I was on that street, and I was going up and down the street, and actually I was going up the street on my way up to see someone, and I saw a little farther up the street a police car stopped outside a building where a number of the people in our church live. And I didn't think much of it. I drove around the police car, its lights were on, and I continued on my way. And about 15-20 minutes later, I was coming back down that same street right out here on College, and I saw two police cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance parked outside that building. And so I quickly called Sarah Kim Bergeron, who lives in the building, comes to our church, and I said, hey, what's up? What's going on? I saw her car, so I knew she was there, presumed she was there, and she said, something has happened with Stanley and Miriam's family, their little boy, downstairs. And she was rather upset. And she said, I've been down and I've prayed. I've been praying with them and the police and everyone is here now. And so obviously there was something going on. And so I was on my way. I was down at the bottom of the hill, so I quickly called Amar and Melissa. I know Melissa has had a lot of contact. Amar and Melissa have had a lot of contact with Stanley and Miriam. And I said, hey, something's happened. Can you get up there? I was able to drop the thing I had, turned around, came back. A couple minutes later, I arrived on the scene, and the ambulance was gone, the fire truck was gone, the police were still there, and Mara and Melissa had arrived. And we went in, and I knew one of the policemen, and he said, hey, Paul, and he said, to make the story short, he said, look, Stanley needs to follow the ambulance. Miriam was already gone in the ambulance with their boy, Victory. Someone needs to take the kids. And so very quickly, Amara and Melissa decided to take Stanley up to the hospital. I grabbed the kids and brought them down to the house. And later on, actually the next morning, as many of you know, they lost their little boy, Victory, to cardiac arrest. And he passed from this world into life with Jesus. And the reason I tell you that story is I want to encourage us. And first I'm going to read to you from Luke chapter 10. And it's where Jesus is teaching, and a lawyer comes and he says to him, teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Because he's an expert in the law, obviously. He says, tell me. And very succinctly, the lawyer answers, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus replies to him, he says, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. So the lawyer sums it up in one phrase, and Jesus says, you're right. Do this, and you will live, or inherit eternal life in other translations. But then the lawyer wanted to, maybe look a little bit better, and or define it. And he said, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus replies to him, as Jesus often does with a parable. He tells him a story. And he says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. And now by chance, a priest who was going down that road, when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And so likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. So the two main representatives of the temple or the church in those days saw the man in need and passed by on the other side. But in the story, you would think that you went from the highest office, and the Levite, the second highest office, and maybe the next would be someone else associated with the temple or a common Jewish person. But Jesus jumps. He says a Samaritan. A Samaritan was a Gentile, an enemy, disdained by the Jews, someone who really didn't want to have a lot to do, or shouldn't have a lot to do, with the man on the side of the road. He said, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and he saw him, and he had compassion. He went to him and bound his wounds, pouring out oil and wine. Then he set him up on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, a fair amount of money, and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Then Jesus asks him, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he answers, he says, well, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. This past week, I happened to be driving down a road, and I happened to see an event where people were in need. But the most amazing thing about this past week was then I got to be part of being a Good Samaritan. I played a role. My family played a role. But more importantly for me, this past week was my church family played a role. The call went out on Friday that this had happened to Stanley and Miriam. And Stanley and Miriam aren't people front and center in our church. They've just moved here to Canada recently and into town to Sherbrooke. Even more recently, a few folks helped them move in. They haven't really been able to come to church because of their kids and the difficulties that their children experience. And so some people know them. I really honestly don't know them that well. But the call went out. Mike sent out a prayer request and informed people. And then our church responded. So Stanley and Miriam aren't our enemy or anything like that, and maybe that's for another day for us. But it was an amazing week for me to see how we responded, how we lived out that command. Because you can't love God. There's nothing really that we can do for God. There's no action that we can take for Him. He doesn't need us to do anything. But He asks us to love Him, to respond to Him, and to demonstrate that, or to be demonstrative in that. He tells us, as that lawyer summed up so well, he said, love your neighbor. Love the people around you. Demonstrate your love for me by loving the thing that's most important to me. The people going up and down the street, the people that you come across, the people at your workplace, your physical neighbor, the one who has need. Show them mercy. And many of you called. I know lots of you prayed. People got on it right away. We're delivering meals. As of Saturday night, people put flowers together, put teddy bears, delivered those to the family. People showed up and had a candle vigil because they lost Victory early Saturday morning to cardiac arrest. And so the family was back home Saturday morning, distraught, loss of a child, horrific thing. And our church went into action. And other people went up to the back window. They had candle vigils and prayed with them and spoke with them and communicated through the kitchen window. Some of you donated clothing for Victory to be buried in, because they wanted him to be all in white, and they didn't have white clothing, and so some of you did that. Participated in organizing the funeral, being part of the funeral. Cards were written. Then many of you actually showed up and attended the funeral, and some of you obviously weren't able to do all of that and weren't around, but our church family showed up in droves at the funeral, stood out at distance. Many of you came with plants and flowers and cared and loved on them, and showed these people that we really don't know very well, that are on the fringes, if you will, of our church, that we love them, that they weren't alone, because they're from Nigeria. They don't have any family in the area. So I was at the back door, at the window, on Wednesday night, the night before the funeral, and I was speaking to Miriam, and she said, I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to. I don't know what to say. And she was at a loss. She said, I'm at a loss for words. I don't know what to do. And I said, well, Miriam, it's okay. You don't need to say anything. This is just our church loving on you. And she said, Paul, I've been all over the world, and I've been in many churches, and I've been in many places, but I've never seen a church like this. So for me, that was pretty huge. We talk about being the hands and feet of Jesus, and you can talk a talk, and but if you don't walk the walk, it doesn't matter. And my dad has always said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I want to encourage you, church family, this morning, that I believe that we've touched the heart of Stanley and Miriam. I believe that we've demonstrated to the folks at the funeral home, and anyone else that's been around, the police officers, a love for God that's been demonstrated by our love and our care and concern for Stanley and for Miriam. And I believe we've touched as well the heart of God, because he says, this is what I desire that you do, to love those people, to care for your neighbor around you. And so often we have a little study, and we say we should do this and we should do that. And today I just wanted to say that we are doing that. And don't stop, keep going. You're doing a great job. I was encouraged this week. I was blessed this week to see our church family doing that, just being a neighbor, and that's awesome. And I believe that we can say lots, we can preach lots, but it's through our actions that we speak loudest. So I'd like to share a little song with you. If you have the time, please listen to it. We have blessed. Please don't stop. We're not done. As long as God's got us on the earth, we're to love our neighbor, and that's what life is all about: loving God and demonstrating that by loving our neighbor. So there's this little song I'd like to share with you. It's been a great song for me. I've shared it with a few other folks. Be blessed. Be blessed this week. I pray that you will be blessed by listening to this song. Thank you for blessing Stanley and Miriam. Thank you for blessing me by being my church.